I now would like to wish you Merry 8th Day of Christmas. You don't hear that much, do you? But it's true, the Christmas season began on December 25th, and it runs for the 12 days of Christmas, ending on the 5th of January. And so today is the 8th day of Christmas. Since I don't see 8 maids a-milking, I suppose we can dispense with the rest of that song and focus on New Year's Day, at least for a while. I intend to get to what happens after the season of Christmas a little bit later, the season that starts on January 6th, Epiphany. So for now, we're into the new year for a few hours, and I want to ask you, how many of you have made resolutions? Okay. Maybe some of you are reluctant to raise your hand that you made resolutions because you've already messed it up. That happens. They aren't easy to keep, so beware. There was one couple that made a New Year's resolution to stop smoking. They were in their 50s and they'd been smoking all their adult lives, and so it was obvious it was going to be a challenge. A few days after the new year began, a friend asked one of them how the resolution was going. She said, "Well, when we woke up on New Year's Day, we did what we always do. I made a pot of coffee, Buddy went out and got the paper, and we sat down to have a cigarette together. A few minutes later, Buddy said, 'Hey, I forgot today is January 1st. We were supposed to quit smoking today.' And I said, 'Well, it looks like we blew it. We'll just have to try again next year.'" See, just in a few hours, and their resolve had dissolved. Resolutions are hard to keep. In fact, one survey taken a few years ago revealed that 70% of all New Year's resolutions are broken in the first 7 days of January. So you have a whole week now to shed those that you aren't that committed to. Many times in New Year's resolutions are no more than half-hearted acknowledgments of things we need to improve in our lives, but they're not approached with a sense of dedication and determination and commitment. In fact, sometimes we're relieved when they're broken. We don't have to worry about them anymore. We can put them off for another year. The idea of resolutions is a good one. We need to be aware of the areas in our life that need improvement. But it takes commitment and action to make these changes. For the last 6 months or so, I have been in a perfect position to pursue a passion of mine, writing. With my hip problem and then the ensuing surgery and recovery, I've been pretty much sedentary for 5 or 6 months, leaving most of my waking hours available to writing or reading, another one of my passions, but I did neither. I decided to do something several times, but nothing. A boy told his father, "Dad, if 3 frogs were sitting on a limb that hung over a pool and one frog decided to jump off into the pool, how many frogs would be left on the limb?" The dad said, 2. "No," said the son, "there are 3 frogs and one decides to jump. How many are left?" And the dad said, "Oh, I get it. If one decides to jump, then they'll all jump, and so there are none left." And the boy said, "No, Dad, the answer's 3. The frog only decided to jump." Does that sound like last year's resolutions? Great inspiration and great resolutions, but oftentimes we only decide. And months later, we're still on that same limb of doing nothing. My resolution to begin writing again was worthless without some action. So last Tuesday, I tried to get a jump on the New Year's resolution, and I sat down and began to write. I made a resolve to write 3 pages in the morning, 3 pages of what I thought would be just drivel. But it turned out that out of one of those exercises came some of what's in this message this morning. The old saying that if you show someone an 8-ounce of glass with 4 ounces of water, the optimist will say that it's half full, and the pessimist will say it's half empty. However, the action-oriented person will say, looks like I need some more water. Now, if you need more water, you're not going to think your way to a full glass. You have to go to the well or the faucet. But sometimes we hesitate to take action because we think there is so little we can do, or maybe we've tried something before and it didn't work. So what's the use? Maybe we think that our little action won't make any difference solving a problem. So we do nothing. When you make a commitment to action, God will guide you through the process. God will give you strength to make progress along the way. And remember, little is much when God's in it. Our God is a God of action. We too need to become a people of action. It's the only way to create lasting change in your life. If you want this year to be different for you, make a choice today to be an action-oriented thinker. You need to do more than just decide to jump. I know that there are action-oriented people right now with a deep commitment for the coming year, since there are only, are you ready, 358 shopping days left till next Christmas. And so the next Christmas has already begun for thousands and thousands of people, from business people, from distributors and manufacturers to marketing and advertising executives. For example, the Toy Industry Association Fair in New York City next month will decide what next Christmas's must-have toys will be. Christmas is a big business, and many businesses spend the entire year focusing on the single month of December. This week I began to think, wouldn't it be great if we could be so focused on the Christmas message that it consumed our entire year as well? The message of hope and joy, peace and love. Today's scripture is found in Matthew, and it's the story of the journey of the wise men from the east following a bright star, coming to Bethlehem to pay homage to the newborn Messiah. Even though this familiar story is often put in the middle of Christmas pageants and nativity scenes, this story of these wise men is important to consider today for several reasons. Anyone could have looked at the sky and seen that star. But these wise men were seekers of spiritual truth, and they sought God's truth. And when they did, God revealed himself to them, because that's what God does. God reveals himself to those who are looking for him. The amazing thing about this story is that these three wise men were not Jewish, but yet God led them to the Messiah. To me, this says a lot about to whom we are to be in relationship with. It doesn't matter if you are a Jew or a Gentile, black or white, rich or poor, male or female, smart or intellectually challenged. Nothing that we can come up with to help us decide whom to include or exclude, or who should or should not be included in our blessing and outreach really matters to God. God will be revealed to anyone who seeks God. These wise men were not only open to God's urgings, not only did they were also open to God's urgings. Not only did they follow the star, they must have been open to hearing God's message. But at the end of that passage, we hear, and having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. These wise men had a dream, and they had a choice to make. They could believe that God was speaking to them, or they could decide it was their imagination. It takes faith to believe that God is speaking to you, and it takes faith to act on that belief. These wise men acted. They could have said, that must be for someone else. Let's go back to our charts. Maybe we should sleep on it for a while. but they were ready for God to guide them. So they took the first step and loaded up their camels and set out. So if the story of the Magi isn't really a part of the birth story that we heard last week, where do they fit in? I mentioned Epiphany a little while ago. Epiphany in the early church was one of the great feast days, second only to Easter in its importance. The third great feast day was Pentecost, with another day that has sort of drifted into the backwaters of religion. And even Easter is greatly watered down today. Easter used to be celebrated with an all-night vigil, and the celebration continued on what was called the Great 50 Days, with a huge blowout on Pentecost. Epiphany, Easter, and Pentecost were the focus of the church. Nobody even thought about celebrating Christmas until the 4th century. For those few who might have heard of Epiphany, the chances are you know it as the day that the wise men came. And that's right, partially. The word Epiphany means manifestation or revelation. So the wise men are celebrated on Epiphany because they represented the revelation of Jesus to the Gentiles. But it used to be that Epiphany was celebrated more than the wise men. In the days when Epiphany was a great church feast, it also celebrated the revelation of Jesus in his first miracle, the changing of water into wine in Cana, and the manifestation of Jesus as the Son of God at his baptism. So these three things, the wise men, Cana, and baptism, were all lumped together to symbolize the revelation of God in Jesus Christ. And such revelation was caused for a great celebration. So what's the deal? Why was Epiphany so important then, and why is it so important now? So unimportant now? There may be several answers, but I think one of them is that for the most part, we no longer expect anything. We no more expect God to be revealed in our midst than we expect stores to start giving away their merchandise. And because we don't expect it, we get what we expect. The early church was a church full of excitement and expectation. They anticipated the return of Jesus at any time, and the persecutions which they endured forced them to be aware of their faith at all times, and sometimes to even die for their faith. Most of us today have lost that sense of excitement and expectation. In the early church, the point of Epiphany was not to remember history, but to be reminded that God appears miraculously to us in places and in ways that we don't expect. If we keep remembering that God seems to thrive on unexpected appearances, and if we keep expecting to see God everywhere we turn, we're not too likely to miss it when it happens again. I think that the star is also an important player in this story. The shepherds had an angelic chorus to guide them to the newborn baby, but the Magi had only a star to guide them. Now, the only angelic chorus I've been blessed with recently is our choir's cantata 2 weeks ago. And as magnificent as they were, I know that I've been led to the place where I have found Jesus not by just one star, but by many. I believe that God has created each one of us to be a star, bringing light into our part of the world. If you think back in your life, I hope you can identify stars in your life that led you closer to Christ. My own memories of the stars in my life go back to my grade school days in Sunday school with Mrs. Bauer, the superintendent. Her passion for Christ began the fire in me. Vern and Colleen Howard, two of the adult sponsors of my MYF group, were another set of stars. They showed me that being Christian could be fun as well as fulfilling. There were many, many other stars that led me, but I remember distinctly Mrs. Bauer's favorite Bible verse, "Be ye doers of the word and not hearers only." And doesn't that tie in now to our need to take action if we're to make a change in our life? God's word and the inspiration we receive through our human stars are fruitless unless we take action. And one of those actions is to begin to act like a star yourself. Too often we shy away from our starring role because we think that our light is too dim or too tarnished to do any good. Whether we realize it or not, our light is leading someone else. Is your star leading people toward the love and peace, or away from these gifts of love and joy and peace and hope we celebrate this season. But I have so little to offer, you say. My star can't be more than a flicker, and my fuel is running low. Remember, little is much when God's in it. The Jewish celebration of Hanukkah ends this evening. It's a celebration of God's presence when the fuel in their lamps was running low. They had enough oil to light their lamp for one day, but it lasted for 8. They had little, but little is much when God's in it. And now they celebrate the revelation of God's enduring presence in this 8-day holy time. What about you? Do you really expect God to be revealed in your life in 2017? Will this year be the year that you realize that little is much when God's in it, and in your actions, no matter how insignificant you may think they are, can produce great changes both in your life and in the world? Like the song said, God changes the world with the seeds we sow. Little is much when we allow God to be in it. Jesus knew it would be difficult to hold that expectation in memory of God's redeeming grace. So before he left his followers, he gave them and us a reminder. It's a celebration that we observe again today when we share the bread and cup of Christ. I pray today that as you take communion, you will really open yourselves to God's leading and urging in your life. I pray that today you will be touched by God's Spirit and resolved to move closer to God in the new year, to become a bright star leading people to God's love and peace. Little is much when God's in it, and God is changing the worlds with the seed you and I sow. How will 2017 be different? How bright will your star be? It's up to you, and your decision will make all the difference in the world. Amen.